So, good evening, everybody. So, in the last class, we were discussing about what are the various things that happen in the ecosystem, right? So, basically, ecosystem is nothing but the system of interaction between the various living organisms and in between living organisms and the non living things. Every organism has to interact or depend on the other living organisms as well as on the abiotic components, that is, the non living things. So, that system of interaction or interconnectivity is nothing but ecosystem. Okay, the system of interaction or interdependency, or how the various things in nature are connected to each other. So, that system is nothing but ecosystem. Now, so many interactions keep on happening among the living organisms and in between living organisms and non living things. Okay, so basically, so many interactions keep on happening. As a result of all those interactions, two things will happen. First is nutrient cycles, and the second is energy flow. Okay, so just try to understand this. Very, very important. So many interactions keep on happening in the ecosystem. So, as a result of all those interactions, two things happen. Okay, in one way or the other, ultimately, two things happen. First is nothing but biogeochemical cycles or nutrient cycles. The second is flow of energy in the ecosystem. So, we already discussed about biogeochemical cycles. So, basically, nutrient cycles or biogeochemical cycles. The matter that is available for living organisms, it is finite, but it is not infinite. The same matter should be recycled over and over again so that it is made available to the living organisms which come into existence. Okay, so basically there is flow of matter from earth to living organisms, and again from living organisms back to earth. So that is the reason biogeochemical cycles. Bio means living organisms, geo means earth, and these are chemical cycles or nutrient cycles. So, the dead bodies of plants and animals are decomposed by decomposers. What do you mean by decomposers? Many species of bacteria and fungi. These are decomposers. They decompose the dead organic matter. What do you mean by that? Breaking down complex organic molecules into simple matter. Simple organic matter and simple inorganic matter. That is decomposition. So, this simple matter will be taken up by plants as nutrients. That is how they make their own food, and that is photosynthesis. We all know this, right? So, when any animal eats a plant, the organic matter will get transferred to the animal. Okay. So, when the animal dies again, its body will be decomposed by decomposers, microorganisms, and then all the nutrients will go back to the earth again. So, in this way, there is continuous flow of matter between earth and living organisms, and then again back from living organisms to earth. So, biogeochemical cycles. So, this is how matter is, constantly recycled. I hope you understood this. Clear, right? So, there are so many nutrient cycles: carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, potassium, sulfur, hydrogen, so many cycles. Clear, right? So, one thing we need to understand here, in each and every biogeochemical cycle, decomposition is a very crucial step. Okay, so without decomposition, there is no recycling of matter. It is as simple as that. Clear, right? Okay. Now, some points about decomposition. Decomposition is a crucial step in the nutrient cycles. So, what exactly do you mean by decomposition? It is the process by which organic substances are broken down into simpler matter, complex organic molecules which are present in our body, in the bodies of all living organisms. They are broken down into simple organic and simple inorganic matter. So, decomposition is done by decomposers, that is, many species or many varieties of bacteria and fungi. So, they have enzymes. What do you mean by enzyme? Enzyme is nothing but the chemical that is present in the cell of an organism. So, with the help of their enzymes, they decompose, and that is how they obtain their energy. Decomposers. Okay. Now, just look at this point, very important. Decomposition is essential for recycling the finite matter in the environment. Okay. Now, look at these 3 points. Already, all these are explained. So, very simple, but very, very important. Decomposition is the first stage in the recycling of nutrients that have been used by an organism, plant or animal, to build its body. Okay. So, already nutrients are present in the body of an organism. It can be plant or animal. So, when that plant or animal dies, nutrients have to be released. They should be sent back into the environment, into the earth. Okay. So, it is done through decomposition. So, decomposition is the process in which the dead tissues break down and are converted into simpler organic and inorganic matter. So, what do we get as a result of decomposition? We get the products of decomposition, which are nothing but nutrients, and also certain gases are released. So, what are those gases and all that we'll discuss in the next chapter, which is wetlands. So, just don't worry about that. So, as a result of decomposition, nutrients are released, and these nutrients, they become the basis for producers to carry out photosynthesis, to prepare their own food. And that is how complex organic matter is again generated. As simple as that. So, you can think in this way. On one hand, you have photosynthesis. On the other hand, you have decomposition. Photosynthesis converts simple matter into complex organic molecules. That is nothing but carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Okay. Plant prepares its own food with the help of carbon dioxide, which is simple inorganic, water, nutrients. Okay. With the help of all these things, plants carry out photosynthesis. That means they are converting simple matter into complex organic molecules. They are preparing their own food. And when I say food, I'm referring to carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Right? And then decomposition does the exact opposite thing. Decomposition breaks down complex organic molecules into simple, organic, and inorganic matter. That's it. Clear, right? So, if you have any doubts, you can ask me, guys. Okay, moving on. Decomposers are the organisms that carry out decomposition of dead animal and plant matter. Okay, so just look at this image. Decomposed apple, not exactly decomposed, partially decomposed. Okay, and this is a partially decomposed trunk of a tree. Now, decomposers are several varieties of bacteria and fungi. This is very important. It has been asked many times in the exam before. These organisms use their enzymes. What do you mean by enzymes? Enzymes are nothing but the various chemicals inside the cells of organisms. These organisms use their enzymes to decompose the dead organic matter and obtain energy and nutrients from it. Simple, right? Okay. Moving on. The next concept is classification of ecosystems. Very, very important concept. Now, ecosystems can be broadly classified as natural ecosystems and man-made ecosystems. And I already told you the difference between natural ecosystems and man-made ecosystems. Natural ecosystems have more biodiversity. Man-made ecosystems have very less biodiversity. Due to that, natural ecosystems are more stable, and natural ecosystems can regulate themselves. They can maintain themselves, or I can say they can run themselves without any human interference. But man-made ecosystems, they are dependent on man. Okay, they need our care, our effort, our work. So natural ecosystems are more stable. That means they are able to withstand abiotic and biotic stresses better. What do you mean by abiotic stress? For example, heavy rains, that is abiotic stress, flooding, or drought, heat wave, cold wave, all these are abiotic stresses. There are many more examples. Now, what do you mean by biotic stress? The stress caused by living organisms. Okay. For example, just imagine a cotton field. There is a pest called cotton bollworm that can destroy the cotton plant. Okay. So that is an insect basically. So that is a biotic stress. So let it be abiotic stress or biotic stress, it doesn't matter. Natural ecosystems are more stable because they are rich in biodiversity. Man-made ecosystems, most of them are monocultures. What do you mean by monocultures? On large piece of land, people cultivate only one variety of plant. That can be either food crop or cash crop or plantation crop. It doesn't matter. That is called monoculture. So such ecosystem is highly vulnerable to both biotic as well as abiotic stresses. So that is the reason we need to keep on applying fertilizer, herbicide, weedicide, insecticide. So basically, to make our agriculture more sustainable, we need to increase the biodiversity of the field, farm, because we need to consider farm as an ecosystem. It is an ecosystem. Okay, there are plants, and in the soil there are so many microorganisms, and these microorganisms are extremely important for fertility. There are certain bacteria called nitrogen fixing bacteria. They convert the free nitrogen gas in the atmosphere into nitrates and nitrites, which are nutrients for the plant. They increase the nitrogen content of the soil, nitrogen fixing bacteria. In that way, there are so many varieties of bacteria which are very important. So plant depends on bacteria, okay, and the bacteria again depend on plants. So it is like an ecosystem there. There are so many interactions. And again, for pollination, we depend on pollinators like honeybees. Best example, honeybee. And not only that, there are many more pollinators also. Okay, so it is an ecosystem. So we have to increase the biodiversity of the agricultural field in order to make our agriculture more sustainable and more productive. For that, there are so many methods. You have crop rotation, crop diversification. We will be discussing about all these things in a separate big topic called sustainable agriculture. We'll discuss that as part of climate change chapter, which is the most important chapter in the entire environment and ecology. So just don't worry about that. I'll explain the meaning of sustainable agriculture. I'll explain the concept of soil organic carbon. Okay. What are the various sustainable agricultural practices? Okay. So it's a very huge topic actually. So anyway, natural ecosystems. They can be broadly classified as terrestrial ecosystems and aquatic ecosystems. As simple as that. What do you mean by terrestrial? Land-based. What do you mean by aquatic? Water. So I have taken 3 examples of terrestrial ecosystems. There are many more examples. Forest, grassland, desert. So what do you mean by grassland? You will understand later. Just don't worry about that. And aquatic ecosystems. They can be classified as freshwater ecosystems and marine ecosystems. When I say marine, I'm referring to salt water, sea and ocean. Now, freshwater ecosystems, that means inland water bodies. They can be further classified as running water, for example, rivers and streams, and then standing water or static water. For example, lake, pond, all these are static water ecosystems. As simple as that. So the classification is very simple, right? Okay, moving on. Next, let us try to understand the meaning of food chain. Now, this is very, very important. A food chain acts as a link through which there is flow of energy from one organism to the other. So what do you mean by that? Now let us go back. Let us go back to the definition of ecosystem. What do you mean by ecosystem? The system of interaction between living organisms and in between living organisms and non-living things. So many interactions keep on happening. As a result of all those interactions, two things will happen. First is biogeochemical cycles or nutrient cycles, and the second is flow of energy. So basically, there is flow of energy due to interactions between various organisms. So basically, I can say that two things happen in every ecosystem. First, nutrient cycles, and second is flow of energy. So basically, energy flows from one organism to another organism. Now, energy flows through what? What is the connection or what is the chain link through which there is flow of energy? That is nothing but food chain. Okay, so food chain is a very simple representation of what eats what, or which organism is eaten by which organism. Okay, now just look at this very simple food chain: plant, grasshopper, bird, snake, and owl. Now, plant carries out photosynthesis. What do you mean by that? Plant generates its energy. Now, without sunlight, plants cannot carry out photosynthesis. So, don't you think that photosynthesis is nothing but plants converting solar energy into chemical energy? Okay, don't you think this is a better way of understanding photosynthesis? When I say chemical energy, plants making carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, all organic chemicals. So, plants are simply converting solar energy into chemical energy. Okay, so that is nothing but photosynthesis. It is a different and very simple way to understand what is photosynthesis. Now, when grasshopper eats plant, there is flow of energy from plant to grasshopper. Now, when bird eats grasshopper, again there is flow of energy from grasshopper to bird. Now, when the snake eats bird, again there is flow of energy from the bird to snake. And finally, when the owl eats the snake, there is flow of energy from the snake to the owl. So, this food chain is acting like a chain link through which there is flow of energy from one organism to the other. As simple as that. So, very simple, right? Very simple, but very important. Now, plants, since because they make their own food, they are called producers. Okay? And then all these are consumers. And owl is the final consumer or tertiary consumer. And these are the intermediate consumers. Okay? Grasshopper, bird, and snake are intermediary or intermediate consumers. Plant is the producer, and the bird here, the owl, it is final consumer or tertiary consumer. So there is a concept called trophic levels here. So what do you mean by trophic level? All that we will discuss in a separate chapter called water pollution. So in water pollution, we will discuss some very important concepts like biomagnification and bioaccumulation. Then we'll understand what is trophic level in great detail. Okay. So right now, one simple point about trophic level is enough. Anyway, we are not going to leave this topic here. We will discuss in great detail about trophic level later. Okay. Now just look at this: plant, grasshopper, small bird, snake, and owl or eagle, final consumer. So basically, a food chain starts with producers and ends with top carnivores. Okay, so grasshopper is a herbivore because it eats plants, and the rest all organisms are carnivores. Okay, now each step or each level in the food chain is called a trophic level. Trophic level of an organism is the position it occupies in a food chain. For example, in this very simple food chain, what is the trophic level of plant producer? Okay. Now, what is the trophic level of grasshopper primary consumer? What is the trophic level of owl final consumer or tertiary consumer? Okay. So, all these are trophic levels. and snake and bird are called secondary consumer. Okay, so all these are trophic levels, as simple as that. For now, just understand and remember this point. We will discuss about trophic levels in great detail when we discuss about biomagnification and bioaccumulation in water pollution chapter. Okay, so I'm hoping that everybody understood this. Now, types of food chains. There are two types of food chains. First one is grazing food chain, and the second is detritus food chain. Now, this is a very simple example of grazing food chain. Very simple. Plant eaten by insect, caterpillar. It is eaten by small bird, and this small bird is eaten by a large bird. So basically, grazing food chain starts with producer and ends with tertiary consumer or final consumer. That is grazing food chain. Very simple, right? Very easy. Now let us try to understand the meaning of detritus food chain. Okay. Now, in detritus food chain, the food chain starts with detritus. Now, what do you mean by detritus? Detritus is nothing but partially decomposed organic matter. So, we know that dead organic matter is decomposed by plants and animals. Dead organic matter of plants and animals is decomposed by decomposers. So, partially decomposed organic matter is detritus. Okay. Now, there are certain organisms called detrivores. Now, detrivores are different and decomposers are different. Now, again, this varies a lot. Basically, there is a lot of variation here. Few websites and few textbooks say that detrivores and decomposers are same. Few websites and few textbooks say that detrivores are different, decomposers are different. But anyway, here we are separating them. Detrivores are different and decomposers are different. Now, decomposers are microorganisms that decompose dead organic matter. Detrivores are insects. Okay, they are insects which consume dead organic matter. Decomposing dead organic matter is different, eating dead organic matter is different. So, those organisms that directly consume or that directly eat detritus are called detrivores. And what do you mean by detritus in the first place? It is partially decomposed dead organic matter. That means it is already partially decomposed, it is still going through decomposition. That partially decomposed dead organic matter is called detritus. And organisms which eat such organic matter are called detrivores. So, detritus food chain starts with detritus. Detritus is eaten by detrivores. And again, detrivores are eaten by carnivores, like for example, this bird. Okay. So, very simple. Grazing food chain starts with plant. Okay. So, look at these points. The consumers which start the food chain utilizing the plant or plant parts as their food constitute the grazing food chain. So, in grazing food chain, first you have plant, and plant is eaten by consumers, and you know the rest of the food chain, right? That is how grazing food chain exists. So, for grazing food chain, green plants are at the base, and then primary consumer is a herbivore. Like for example, look at this. So, here caterpillar is a herbivore. It is primary consumer. It is herbivore because it is eating plant. Okay. Now, just look at this. Look at this example for the sake of clarity. Grass is eaten by caterpillar. Caterpillar is eaten by lizard. Lizard is eaten by snake. So, here in this example, snake is the final consumer. Grass is the producer and caterpillar is primary consumer. So, that is grazing food chain. Simplest of all, very easy to understand. And this is terrestrial ecosystem example. Okay, grass is eaten by caterpillar, caterpillar is eaten by lizard, lizard is eaten by snake. This is terrestrial ecosystem example. Now, for the sake of clarity, we'll go for one more example, that is aquatic ecosystem example. In aquatic ecosystem, you have something called phytoplankton. So, phytoplankton is the producer here. You can simply call it as producer or primary producer. Okay. What do you mean by phytoplankton? We'll discuss later in great detail, just don't worry. Now, phytoplankton is eaten by zooplankton. Now, here zooplankton becomes primary consumer. Like here, in the case of terrestrial ecosystem, caterpillar is the primary consumer because caterpillar is eating grass. Grass carries out photosynthesis. In the same way, for aquatic ecosystem, phytoplankton is primary producer. That means phytoplankton carries out photosynthesis. Phytoplankton is eaten by zooplankton, which is herbivore, or I can say primary consumer. Zooplankton are eaten by fish, and fish are eaten by pelicans or birds, and these are the final consumer here in this example. Okay, so when you say grazing food chain, it starts with an organism that carries out photosynthesis. For terrestrial ecosystems, green plants. For aquatic ecosystem, phytoplankton. That is the only difference. Both green plants and phytoplankton carry out photosynthesis. Okay, and the organism that consumes the producer is primary consumer, and that is herbivore. That is how grazing food chain exists. But when you speak about detritus food chain, it all starts with detritus. What do you mean by detritus? Partially decomposed organic matter. Okay, dead organic matter which is partially decomposed. It is still going through decomposition. That is detritus. Detritus is eaten by detrivores, which are insects like worms, flies. Okay, they consume dead organic matter. And they are again eaten by carnivores, like for example, blackbird in this example. Okay, so look at these points, you'll understand everything. Very simple and very easy. This type of food chain starts from dead organic matter of decaying animals and plant body. Decaying means decomposing. Dead organic matter or detritus feeding organisms are called detrivores. Detrivores directly eat dead organic matter. So decomposition is different. Decomposers are different. Detrivores are different. Okay, so don't get confused here. Decomposers are microorganisms mostly. They carry out decomposition. That means breaking down complex organic molecules into simple matter, simple organic and inorganic matter. That is decomposition. Detrivores, they directly eat dead organic matter. And these detrivores are eaten by predators, like for example, blackbird in this example. As simple as that. Now, this point is very, very important. You must understand this point. The grazing and detritus food chains are linked together. Okay, so the grazing food chain and detritus food chains are both linked together. How? The initial energy source for detritus food chain is detritus. What do you mean by detritus? Dead organic matter. And from where are you getting dead organic matter? From the grazing food chain. Okay, detritus food chain starts with detritus. What is detritus? Dead organic matter. From where do you get dead organic matter? From the grazing food chain. So that is how the grazing food chain and detritus food chains are linked. For example, see here, dead leaves are eaten by woodlouse. Woodlouse is eaten by blackbird. So from where do you get dead leaves? From plants. When I say plants, grazing food chain. As simple as that. So I hope it makes sense to you now, guys. Simple, right? Okay, moving on. Now, what do you mean by phytoplankton? Very, very, very important. Now, phytoplankton are microalgae. Okay. Now, what do you mean by microalgae? These are microscopic in size. You cannot see them with your naked eye. Now, phytoplankton are similar to terrestrial plants. That means phytoplankton also contain chlorophyll. Phytoplankton can also carry out photosynthesis. Phytoplankton contains chlorophyll, and even phytoplankton needs sunlight to carry out photosynthesis to live and grow. So basically, Phytoplankton contain chlorophyll and they require sunlight. So in this context, in this way, phytoplankton are similar to terrestrial plants or the green plants. So phytoplankton are found in seas and oceans. They are also found in freshwater bodies. Okay. Now they are only found in the topmost levels of water or in the topmost layers of water, wherever there is sunlight. Now we all know that the deeper you go into a water body, like for example, you are diving deep into ocean, the intensity of sunlight becomes lesser and lesser exponentially. So sunlight is found abundantly in the top layers of water. Okay. So only there phytoplankton are present. First of all, what do you mean by the word plankton? Plankton means any organism, okay, that doesn't move on its own. It doesn't have locomotion organs. Okay, so it cannot move on its own. It just floats in the water. It goes wherever the ocean currents take it, or it goes wherever the waves take it. Okay, so it cannot move on its own. It doesn't have to move. It just floats in the water. So in this way, jellyfish, even they are plankton. Okay, so anyway, phytoplankton float in the upper part of the ocean and freshwater bodies where sunlight penetrates the water. The deeper and deeper you go into a water body, the lesser and lesser the sunlight becomes. But phytoplankton needs to carry out photosynthesis to live. And for that, they need sunlight, because ultimately, what is photosynthesis? Plants and phytoplankton converting solar energy into chemical energy. Okay. Now, same like terrestrial plants, phytoplankton also requires inorganic nutrients such as nitrates, phosphates, and sulfur. Okay. So we supply all these to the terrestrial plants in agriculture in the form of fertilizers. So phytoplankton also needs inorganic nutrients. Because what is photosynthesis? Inorganic nutrients will be converted into complex organic molecules, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Okay. So phytoplankton also needs inorganic nutrients, and they convert these inorganic nutrients into organic matter, that is proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Now, these are the important groups of phytoplankton. So when I say phytoplankton, I'm referring to a wide variety of organisms. There are so many varieties here. So all those varieties can be broadly classified into three major groups: diatoms, cyanobacteria, and dinoflagellates. Okay. Now, these are diatoms and this is dinoflagellate. These are microscopic in nature, very, very small. You cannot see them with your naked eye. Now, look at this point. You'll understand the importance of phytoplankton. Scientists estimate that half of the global photosynthetic carbon fixation and 50 to 80% of oxygen production on Earth comes from marine phytoplankton. That means phytoplankton which is found in the oceans. Now, let us look at this statement again. Very important and also very interesting. Around half of global photosynthetic carbon fixation. Now, for photosynthesis, plants and phytoplankton need carbon dioxide. Where do you find carbon dioxide? In the air, in the atmosphere. So basically, these plants and phytoplankton, they absorb carbon dioxide and they convert that into complex organic molecules along with inorganic nutrients. Okay. So it is called carbon fixation. That means carbon dioxide gas is being captured and it is being converted into organic matter. Okay, so it is carbon fixation. So around half of the carbon which is getting fixed through photosynthesis is due to phytoplankton, especially marine phytoplankton. See guys, right now we are suffering from the major problem of global warming and climate change. Okay, the reason why we have global warming and climate change is there is excess carbon concentration in the atmosphere. So why do we have excess concentration? That we'll discuss in the next chapter, wetlands. Okay, and we'll discuss about this majorly in climate change chapter. So just don't worry about that. But anyway, we all know that there is a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. and that is causing global warming, which is ultimately causing climate change. So climate change is the broad umbrella term. Okay, so we need to reduce carbon concentration in the atmosphere. So basically, to fight against climate change, we have to do two things. First, we have to reduce our carbon emissions, and second, we have to reduce the already existing carbon in the atmosphere. Okay, somehow we have to pull it and store it somewhere. So that is already being done by plants and phytoplankton. They need carbon dioxide, right, to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, so around half of the global carbon fixation that is happening through photosynthesis is done by marine phytoplankton. That means marine phytoplankton are extremely important to reduce carbon concentrations in the atmosphere. And not only that, we know that as a result of photosynthesis, oxygen is released into the atmosphere. So around 50 to 80% of oxygen production on Earth comes from marine phytoplankton. That means the population of marine phytoplankton is so huge, and they are spread across all the oceans. They are spread across a vast area, and they are playing a major role in regulating carbon concentrations in the atmosphere, and not only that, even in production of oxygen. So that is the beauty of marine phytoplankton. Okay, so this is the image of cyanobacteria. So here we have seen that there are three major groups of phytoplankton: diatoms, cyanobacteria, and dinoflagellates. So these are diatoms, and this is dinoflagellate. It has tail actually, dinoflagellate. And then this is cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is also called blue-green algae. Now we'll look at a very interesting topic. This is very interesting. It is called the Great Oxygenation Event. The Great Oxygenation Event. Okay, so what is that? It was a time period when the atmosphere and the oceans first experienced a rise in oxygen concentration, approximately 2.4 to 2 billion years ago. So basically, 2.4 to 2 billion years ago, the atmosphere and the oceans did not have much oxygen. Now we all know that oxygen is extremely crucial for life. Okay, but 2.4 to 2 billion years ago, the atmosphere and the oceans did not have much oxygen concentration. But this is when oxygen started increasing. Okay, so what is the age of the Earth? Somewhere around 4.5 to 4.8 billion years old. From then till this time period, the atmosphere and oceans did not have much oxygen. Now we know that after nitrogen, oxygen is the second major component of the atmosphere. So from where did we get such a huge amount of oxygen in the atmosphere? It is due to cyanobacteria. Okay. Now the Great Oxygenation Event, it lasted approximately from 2.4 to 2 billion years ago. During this time, cyanobacteria is part of phytoplankton. So cyanobacteria also carries out photosynthesis. So what is photosynthesis? Take carbon dioxide, release oxygen. That is photosynthesis. So this cyanobacteria started carrying out photosynthesis, and that is how cyanobacteria released oxygen into the atmosphere. And to be honest, currently all the living organisms that depend on oxygen, they all owe their life to cyanobacteria. It is due to cyanobacteria that we have so much oxygen in the atmosphere. Okay, so biologically produced oxygen, what do you mean by that? Oxygen released due to photosynthesis started to accumulate in the Earth's atmosphere, causing many existing species on Earth to go extinct. So during that time, okay, when oxygen concentration was very low, anaerobic bacteria and anaerobic life forms used to exist. Even now, anaerobic bacteria exists. But back then, okay, all the life forms were anaerobic. Like most of the life forms were anaerobic. That means they did not want oxygen. Oxygen was toxic for them. So when cyanobacteria started releasing oxygen in large concentrations into the Earth's atmosphere, oxygen concentration started to increase, and many life forms which were anaerobic in nature, they became extinct because oxygen was harmful for them. Okay, So this great oxygenation event was caused by cyanobacteria. And due to this event, there was development of multicellular life forms. That means complex life forms. Like we are multicellular. Okay. So we know this, right? Single celled organisms, which are very simple. And then we also have multi-celled organisms, which are very complex, complicated. We are all multi-celled organisms. So it is due to the great oxygenation event. There was development of multicellular organisms. Okay. So we all owe our existence to cyanobacteria. So I hope you understood the meaning of the great oxygenation event. Okay, very interesting, right? So basically, Earth formed somewhere 4.5 to 4.8 billion years ago. And then there was no oxygen in the atmosphere and also in the oceans. That means there was oxygen, but the concentration was very low. Okay, there was more CO2 back then. Now, this cyanobacteria started taking CO2 and then it started carrying out photosynthesis. It started releasing oxygen into the atmosphere and also into the oceans. So that is how oxygen concentration increased gradually. And finally, the atmosphere became, filled with oxygen. And then many of the life forms that used to exist back then, for them, oxygen was toxic. They were all anaerobic, organisms. They all got extinct. They got wiped away from the planet. And then due to abundant oxygen, multicellular life forms came into picture. And that is how finally, we came into picture. It is all due to cyanobacteria. Okay. So that is the importance of phytoplankton. Very simple. For terrestrial ecosystems, green plants are the producers. For aquatic ecosystems, you have phytoplankton. Not only phytoplankton, you also have aquatic plants. What do you mean by aquatic plants? So just imagine that you are diving into ocean or a lake. Okay. You find few plants which are submerged in water. Okay, even they are, plants and they carry out photosynthesis. So they are aquatic plants. So very simple. For terrestrial ecosystems, green plants are the producers. For aquatic ecosystems, phytoplankton and aquatic plants are the producers. What do you mean by producers? They carry out photosynthesis and they prepare their own food. What do you mean by photosynthesis? In very simple terms, converting solar energy into chemical energy. So photosynthesis is the opposite of decomposition. Just try to understand in this way. Clear, right? Okay. So I hope you understood this, guys. Moving on. Now we'll try to understand the meaning of food web. A food web consists of all the food chains in an ecosystem. So basically, food chain is a very simple representation. But in nature, it's all much more complicated. Okay, like for example, this is a very simple food chain. Producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Okay, so this is a very simple food chain. But in nature, it is much more complicated. Do you know why? Very simple. There are more than one producer, more than one primary consumer, more than one secondary consumer, and more than one tertiary consumer. In fact, there are so many producers, so many primary consumers, so many secondary consumers, and so many tertiary consumers. There are so many. Okay. So in nature, in reality, we don't have simple food chains like this. We have complex food webs. Okay. And a food web shows all the different food chains in an ecosystem. Okay. Like for example, plants are eaten not just by one type of primary consumer, but by many different types of primary consumers. And these primary consumers have not one predator, but many different types of predators. And also there are many different types of final consumers. For example, here the crane is a final consumer. We are also final consumers. Okay. So in nature, it is much more complicated, and that is a food web. Just to get this point, you'll understand everything. A food web is a detailed interconnecting diagram that shows the overall food relationships, not relationship, relationships, plural. That shows the overall food relationships between various organisms in a particular ecosystem. For example, in this lake ecosystem, just imagine that this is a lake. Okay. So in this lake ecosystem, we have multiple primary producers, we have multiple herbivores or primary consumers, we have multiple secondary consumers, and we have multiple final consumers. Okay. So the relationship between all these organisms is shown through a food web. So a food web consists of many different food chains that are very complexly interconnected to each other. As simple as that. Simple, right? Okay. Moving on. Now, let us try to understand the meaning of the word ecology. Very, very important. From here, concepts become a bit complicated, a bit tough to understand, but not so tough. These are not technical. We are just discussing the basic stuff. So from here, it becomes very important, much more important. Now, ecology is very simply study of ecosystems. Now, what do you mean by ecosystem? The system of interaction or interdependency between various living organisms and in between living organisms and the non-living things. That is ecosystem. So studying those interactions or studying how the various organisms are depending on each other, studying how the organisms are interacting with each other, studying how the organisms are interacting with the non-living things. So that study is nothing but ecology, as simple as that. So I can simply say that ecology is study of ecosystems. Okay, so look at this definition, very important. Ecology is the branch of study concerned with the relations of organisms to one another. Okay, now due to all the interactions that happen in ecosystems, two things will happen. First is energy flow and second is nutrient cycling. So studying this is nothing but ecology. Okay, due to all the interactions that happen in an ecosystem, interactions between living organisms and interactions between living organisms and non-living things, due to all these interactions, two things happen in an ecosystem. What are those two? Energy flow in food chain and nutrient cycling. So studying these and studying the interactions is ecology, as simple as that. So ecology is the branch of study concerned with relations of organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. That means the abiotic components. That is nothing but environment. As simple as that. Now, in ecology, we study individual organisms and then we study groups of organisms called population. And then we also study something called community. We study ecosystems. We study a broader concept called biome, and then ultimately we study the biosphere. Okay, all these are different levels of ecological organization. So this brings us to the next concept called levels of ecological organization. This is a very, very important concept in ecology. Levels of ecological organization. These are the various levels: organism, population, community, ecosystem, biome, and biosphere. And also we have something called species, a term called species. What is that? We'll discuss now. Just don't worry. So anyway, forget about this for some time. Focus on the first point, the definition of ecology. That is very, very important. And guys, I'm hoping that everybody understood this. Okay. Now, before discussing levels of ecological organization, let us try to understand the difference between ecology, environment, and ecosystem. Let us try to keep on asking ourselves fundamental questions to get conceptual clarity. Okay, so this is very, very important. Now, ecology. It is a combination of two words, oikos and logy. Oikos means house or dwelling, and logy means the study of. Okay, so basically, the literal translation of the word ecology is studying our dwelling or studying our habitat or studying our house. And where do we live? We live in an ecosystem, right? Now, look at this very simple definition again. Ecology is the study of relationships and interactions of living organisms with other living organisms and their surrounding environment. So, relationships and interactions of organisms with other organisms, and also their relationships and interactions with the non living things, their physical surroundings. So, studying those relationships and interactions is nothing but ecology. As simple as that. So, there are three things that we study in ecology. First, we study the living organisms. Next, we study the relationships and interactions of living organisms with other living organisms. Okay. And then we also study relationships and interactions of organisms with the physical surroundings, that is, the non living things. These are the three things that we study in ecology. Okay. Look at this. Second one, relationship and interactions of organisms with other organisms. Like, for example, what is the kind of relationship is there between bacteria rhizobium and plant roots? The relationship between rhizobium bacteria and plant roots is called symbiotic relationship. Bacteria rhizobium carries out nitrogen fixation. What do you mean by that? Converting the free nitrogen gas, which is present in abundance in the atmosphere, into nitrates and nitrites, which are taken up by plants, roots of the plants, as nutrients. That is what rhizobium does. So, not only rhizobium, there are many more nitrogen fixing bacteria. Some nitrogen fixing bacteria are free living, but some bacteria like rhizobium, they are symbiotic with the roots of the plants. What do you mean by symbiotic? Both rhizobium and the plant roots depend on each other for survival. That kind of relationship between two different organisms is called symbiotic relationship. Okay. This bacteria as well as the plant roots, they both depend on each other for survival. Actually, the area around the roots of the plant in the soil is called rhizosphere. Because it is rich in rhizobacteria, rhizobium. Okay. So, many different varieties of bacteria carry out nitrogen fixation. Some of them are free living. That means they don't have any close association with the roots of the plant. But some bacteria like rhizobium, they are symbiotically bound to the plant roots. So the relationship between rhizobium and plant roots is symbiotic relationship. What do you mean by that? They both depend very strongly on each other for survival. If you separate them, they both die. Okay. So that is just one of the relationships. There are many more relationships. All these we will study in great detail. Just don't worry about that. All these relationships we are going to study in great detail in the first chapter itself. Okay. And also there is competition among herbivores. What do you mean by herbivores? Animals that eat plants. Okay. So just imagine African savanna, African forest. There are so many herbivores. There are so many different types of deers. There are zebras, there are giraffe. Okay, so many herbivores are there. So they all compete with each other for grass, for plants, for food. Okay, so all these relationships and interactions between different organisms are studied as part of ecology. Next, we also study the interactions of living organisms with surrounding environment. That means how the organism responds to climate, soil, topography, water availability, etc. What do you mean by topography? In very simple terms, how the land is in a given area. Is the land a plain land, or is it a plateau, or is it a valley, or is it a rugged mountainous region? Okay, the structure of the land, that is topography. Okay, so how does the organism respond to the changing climatic conditions? How does the organism respond to, intense heat or heavy rains? How does the organism respond to poor soil conditions or fertile soil conditions? How does the organism respond to different topographies? Okay, so even that is studied as part of ecology. Clear, right? For example, animals in deserts have long ears to increase heat loss and keep themselves cool. Because if you increase the surface area, there is more heat loss. Okay, so animals in deserts, temperatures become very extreme, very hot in deserts. the animal has to maintain a cool body temperature or else it will die. Okay. So, how do the organisms keep themselves cool in deserts? They have long ears to increase the surface area, to increase heat loss, and to keep themselves cool. While animals in cold areas, they have to keep their body warm. Animals in cold areas have to keep a warm body temperature or else they'll freeze and die. So they have small ears to prevent heat loss. So that is how animals respond to the climate. That is their interaction with the surrounding environment. Even this is studied as part of ecology. Okay. So basically, ecology is a very beautiful branch of study. Now, interactions of living organisms with other organisms and interactions of organisms with the non-living things, with the surrounding environment. They all finally lead to two things. First, energy flow through food chains or food web, and then nutrient cycles or biogeochemical cycles. So very simply, these are the two things that happen in ecosystem. In an ecosystem, in a given second, some millions of interactions happen, or some trillions and billions of interactions happen. All those interactions will ultimately lead to two things. First, flow of energy through food chain or food web, and then nutrient cycles or biogeochemical cycles. As simple as that. So I'm hoping that you understood the meaning of ecology and what does ecology deal with. Okay. So anyway, I hope this is clear. Now, we tried to understand the difference between environment, ecosystem, and ecology. So, very simple. When I say environment, environment refers to surroundings. So, look at your surroundings. You find two things: living things and non living things. Living, biotic; non living, abiotic. Okay. So, biotic means surrounding plant and animal communities and microorganisms. Let us not ignore microorganisms. Okay, you just cannot see them, but microorganisms are present literally everywhere. And then abiotic, that means non living. Soil, sunlight, topography, water, atmosphere, nutrients, all these are the non living things. So, ecosystem is the surroundings in which you find both living things and non living things. Now, ecosystem. What do you mean by that? In an ecosystem, we study the interactions of organisms, interactions among organisms, and also the interactions between organisms and the surroundings. So basically, in ecosystem, you consider both biotic and abiotic things. That means environment is present. And also, if you just look at biotic and abiotic, it becomes environment. But in ecosystem, you're also studying how the organisms interact with each other and how the organisms interact with the non-living things. So you also include ecology. That means how living organisms interact with each other and how they interact with the environment. So very simply, ecosystem is nothing but ecology plus environment. Okay, so this is the very easy way to understand. And ecology is nothing but study of ecosystems, or very simply study of mother nature. That is ecology. Clear, right? So I'm hoping that you understood the difference between the terms environment, ecosystem, and ecology. Environment, surroundings. It has living things, non-living things. In an ecosystem, you study the interactions. So in an ecosystem, you study both living things, non-living things. That means you don't exactly study the non-living things. You study the interactions between living things and non-living things. You study living organisms. You study interactions between living organisms. And you also study interactions between living organisms and non-living things in ecology. So ecosystem is nothing but both environment and ecology. As simple as that. Clear, right? So I'm hoping that you understood this, guys. Okay. So the next concept is levels of ecological organization. So guys, this is going to take a lot of time. Okay, so we'll do one thing. We'll just wind up this session here for today, and we will study levels of ecological organization tomorrow. This is going to be a very, very interesting topic, extremely interesting. So levels of ecological organization is a very important topic under ecology, and we'll study this tomorrow in tomorrow's session. Okay. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you understood all the concepts that we have discussed. I hope you had a pleasant and fun learning experience. So thank you so much for joining me. Keep watching, keep learning, and I wish you all the best.